The police came through my front door at 3:40 in the morning, and I already knew which one of my children had unlocked it. My neighbors on Bellamy Court stood in their bathrobes and watched two officers walk me down my own driveway in handcuffs. My daughter stood beside the mailbox with her phone raised, narrating to 4,000 strangers about her father's difficult night. At the station, a detective opened the file attached to my name, read halfway down the second page, and set his coffee down without looking at it. He told the officer behind me to take the cuffs off, and his voice cracked when he said it. Then he sat across from me, folded his hands like a man about to ask for a favor, and asked me a question that ended 3 careers before sunrise. My name is Walter Hale. I am 71 years old, and for 28 years I worked as a court investigator for the state, which is a plain title for a strange job. When a family went to a judge and said that an old man could no longer manage his own affairs, I was the one sent to that old man's house to find out whether it was true. I sat at 10,000 kitchen tables. I read bank statements at midnight. I learned to tell the difference between a son who was frightened and a son who was hungry. 6 weeks before that night, my family threw me a retirement dinner at a steakhouse on Carrollton Avenue, and my son-in-law stood up with a glass in his hand and said that the hardest part of loving a man like me was watching him refuse to admit when the work was finished. Everyone laughed. My daughter squeezed my wrist and said, "Daddy, nobody's taking anything from you. We just want you safe." I smiled, and I ate my steak, and I drove home, and at 11 o'clock that night I opened my laptop and started building the trap that would put both of them in federal custody. Before I go on, my friend, tell me where you're listening from tonight. Put your town in the comments so I know who's sitting with me. And if anybody has ever spoken to you like you were already gone while you were still in the room, hit that like button and stay with me, because this is the whole story. We lived in Harlow Springs, Missouri, in a brick house my wife Eleanor and I bought in 1986 with a down payment we saved in a coffee can. Eleanor died 4 years ago in the front bedroom, in February, with her hand in mine and the radiator ticking. After that, the house got very quiet, and I let it stay quiet, and maybe that was my first mistake. I ate standing up at the counter. I read case files I was no longer assigned to. My daughter Claire started coming by on Sundays with grocery bags, and I was grateful for it. And I never once asked myself why a woman who runs the administrative wing of a regional hospital had 2 free hours every single Sunday for a father she used to call twice a year. The night they came, I was already awake. I was sitting in Eleanor's chair by the front window in my gray sweater and my walking shoes, with the lamp off, listening to the ice maker drop cubes in the kitchen. I had been sitting there since 2. When the headlights swung across the ceiling, I did not move. I heard the storm door, then a key in the deadbolt, and I want you to understand that sound, my friend, because that is the sound this whole story is built on. Not a battering ram. A key. My key. Copied, in my daughter's hand. 2 officers came in with flashlights and told me to stand up slowly and keep my hands where they could see them. The younger one apologized twice. They told me they had a report of an unauthorized person on the property, a man who had entered the residence and refused to leave, possibly confused, possibly a danger to himself. I asked them whose property they believed it was. The older officer read a name off a folded paper, and the name was Hale Family Legacy Holdings, LLC, and the managing member listed was Marcus Deal, my son-in-law, an estate attorney with a strip mall office and a Rolex he wore to church. They walked me out barefoot in my walking shoes with no socks, which is a small thing that I still think about. The porch boards were cold. The Reeses across the street had their light on. Mrs. Kowalczyk, who is 83, and who Eleanor drove to chemotherapy every Tuesday for a year, stood at her window with her hand over her mouth. And at the end of the driveway, under the streetlight, my daughter was already live. Claire had done her hair. That is the detail. It was 3:45 in the morning, and my daughter had done her hair and put on the sage green blouse she wears for hospital board meetings, and she was holding her phone at chin height with the front camera on, speaking in the soft, brave voice people use when they are performing sorrow for an audience. She said, "This is what caregiving actually looks like, folks." She said, "We've been dreading this for months." She said, "Please keep Dad in your prayers. He doesn't understand what's happening right now." I understood exactly what was happening. I had understood for 91 days. Beside her, parked half on the grass, was the wheelchair ramp. Not parked, of course. Built, bolted to my own front steps in April by a contractor Marcus hired, over my objection, for a man who walks 2 miles every morning to the reservoir and back. I had told them I did not need it. Claire had cried in my kitchen, and said she couldn't sleep worrying about me on those steps in the winter. So I let them build it. $1,400 of pressure-treated lumber, and I paid for it. And that night I watched a police officer walk me down it while my daughter filmed. And I finally understood what it had always been. It was not a ramp. It was an exhibit. In the back of the cruiser I kept my breathing slow and I did not ask for a lawyer. Because a man who asks for a lawyer at 4 in the morning looks guilty, and a man who says nothing at all looks like exactly what I needed to look like for another 2 hours. I looked out the window at the Casey's on Route 9 and I thought about a woman named Delphine Barrow, a client of mine in 2011, 88 years old, whose nephew had her declared incapacitated over a forged pharmacy record. It took me 9 months to get her back into her own house. She died 6 weeks after she got there. I have never stopped thinking about those 6 weeks. They put me in an interview room with a table bolted to the floor and a fluorescent tube that buzzed at a pitch that made my molars ache. My wrists were raw. I sat straight because a slouching old man is a confused old man, and I was going to need this room to see me clearly. After maybe 40 minutes, the door opened and a detective came in with a folder and a paper cup of coffee. He was somewhere in his 50s, gray at the temples, tie loosened, the tired look of a man on the back end of a double shift. He said his name was Detective Ray Okonquo. He sat down and told me, not unkindly, that I was in a bad spot. He said there was an emergency guardianship petition filed the previous afternoon in Kessler County. He said there was a psychiatric evaluation attached to it, signed by a physician, stating that I had experienced progressive cognitive decline over the past 6 months, including disorientation, paranoid ideation, and at least 2 documented incidents of wandering. He said the property had been transferred into a family holding entity in March for my own protection, and that as of yesterday I had no legal standing to be in that house. He said the trespass charge was the least of it. He said if the guardianship went final at the hearing on Thursday, I would not be able to sign a check, sell a car, hire a lawyer, or refuse a placement in a memory care facility, and that a facility bed had already been reserved in Springfield under my name. Then he opened the folder to attach his notes, and he stopped. He read for a while. He turned the page. He read some more. I watched the muscle in his jaw work. He looked up at me, and the tiredness was gone out of his face entirely, replaced by something closer to fear. And he said the officer standing behind me needed to take the cuffs off right now. Then he sat back down and he asked me his question. He said, "Mr. Hale, your file says you spent the last 3 years of your career on the State Guardianship Fraud Task Force. It says you're the co-author of the intake protocol my department uses to screen these exact reports. So can you explain to me why a man who wrote the manual on this crime just got arrested by my officers using a forged version of his own paperwork?" I said, "Detective, I've been waiting 91 days for somebody in a position of authority to ask me that in a room with a recording device. And then I asked him to bring me my personal effects, because there was a phone in the property envelope that had been recording audio in my house since the first week of April, and I wanted him to hear a conversation that took place at my kitchen table 9 days ago. To understand what he heard, you have to come back with me 3 months, to a Tuesday in April, and to a sound in my own hallway. I woke up around 1 in the morning because the furnace kicked on and something rattled in the vent, the way it does. On my way back from the bathroom, I noticed light under the door of the back room I use as an office. That room has Eleanor's sewing machine in the corner and my case files in the cabinets and the good lamp. I hadn't been in there since supper. I stood in the dark hallway in my bare feet and I listened, and I heard my daughter's voice say, "Lo, this one, the 2019 one. It has the account numbers on the second page." I did not open the door. 28 years of this work teaches you one thing above all others, and it is the hardest thing to actually do when it's your own blood on the other side of the wood. If you confront a person before you have the whole map, all you do is teach them where the holes in their story are. They don't stop. They get better. So I stood there, and I counted my own heartbeats until they slowed down. And then I went back to bed and lay on my back and stared at the ceiling until the sky turned gray. In the morning I made coffee and asked Claire, who had stayed over in the guest room, whether she'd slept all right. She said she'd been up a little, she'd had a headache, and gone looking for aspirin. I said the aspirin was in the kitchen. She said she knew. She'd gotten turned around. She kissed the top of my head. She was radiant that morning, my friend, light on her feet. And I sat there with my coffee and I understood that my daughter was a better liar than most of the people I had put in front of judges. Over the next 2 weeks, I did what I used to get paid to do. I pulled my own records. The recorder's office in Kessler County showed a quitclaim deed filed on the 12th of March, transferring 1,140 Bellamy Court from Walter J. Hale to Hale Family Legacy Holdings, LLC. My signature was on it. It was a good forgery. It was better than good. The W had the right hitch in it, the one my hand has made since a wrist fracture in 1993, and there is exactly one place a person could have gotten a clean sample of that. The stack of blank signed authorization pages I kept in my file cabinet from my last year of work. The LLC had been registered in February by Marcus Deal. Registered agent, Marcus Deal. Managing member, Marcus Deal. Second member, Claire Hale Deal, 20%. Then I found the trust. Eleanor and I had built our savings over 40 years the boring way, a little at a time, and after her life insurance and the sale of her mother's land in Arkansas, there was $6,400,000 sitting in accounts. I had spent my whole career learning how to protect. In March, $340,000 of it had been moved into something called the Hale Protective Management Trust. Not stolen, moved. Legally, on paper, by a fiduciary who did not yet exist but who was scheduled to exist as of Thursday, the 9th of July, when a judge in Kessler County was expected to sign an order making Marcus Deal the guardian of my person and my estate. And then there was the doctor. The evaluation attached to their petition was signed by Dr. Alan Pruitt, a geriatric psychiatrist with a private practice in a converted Victorian on the north side of Springfield. I had never met him. I had never sat in a room with him. He had documented 6 months of my cognitive decline, including a wandering incident in February in which I was allegedly found at a gas station 11 miles from my home, disoriented, in my pajamas. On the date of that alleged incident, I was in Little Rock at my brother-in-law's funeral, in a church, in front of 200 witnesses, and I have the program with the date printed on it. I pulled every guardianship case in 3 counties that had a Pruitt evaluation attached. There were 14 of them in 22 months. 14 families, 14 old people, 14 sets of accounts moved into protective management by 4 different attorneys, and Marcus Deal's name appeared on 6 of them. The average estate was $800,000. Pruitt's fee, billed to the estate after the order was signed, was $30,000 a case. My son-in-law had not invented a scheme to rob me. He had a business, and I was simply the largest account he had ever brought in. So I made a decision, and I want to be honest with you about it, because a lot of people are going to say it was a cold thing to do. I decided not to save myself alone. If I walked into that courtroom on Thursday with my proof and blew the petition apart, I would win my house back and Marcus would lose his license. Maybe. Eventually. And Pruitt would keep signing evaluations for the other 3 attorneys, and 14 would become 40. I had spent my career watching that exact thing happen. So I decided I was going to let them build the entire case against me, all the way to the end, all the way to the arrest. Because a forgery is only a crime you can prove after somebody actually uses it. That meant I had to give them a man in decline. I got good at it, my friend. I want you to know that. In May, I started leaving the burner on under an empty kettle when Claire's car turned onto Bellamy. I called her Ellie twice, on purpose, and watched her face do the thing it did, that flicker of grief and calculation running at the same time. I asked her the same question about the Kowalczyks' dog 3 times in one visit. In June, I let her find my checkbook in the freezer, which was heavy-handed, and she photographed it, which told me she was documenting for a file, which is exactly what I wanted to confirm. Meanwhile, I put a recorder in the vent register behind Eleanor's sewing machine, and a second one under the lip of the kitchen table where the 4 screws are, and I registered a Wyoming shell company under a name that means nothing to anybody. And inside that company, I built a trust. Here is the piece you need, because everything at the end turns on it. I did not hide my money. Hidden money makes you look guilty. Instead, I created a second trust with a name almost identical to theirs, the Hale Protective Asset Trust, and I made it look like the primary vessel holding all $6,400,000. It had statements. It had a real account at a real institution. It had, on paper, everything they wanted. What it did not have was money. It had $11,000 and a clause on page 4 stating that any petition, order, or instrument purporting to assign control of the trust corpus would be transmitted, in full, with all attachments and signatures, to the State Elder Financial Exploitation Registry within 4 hours of filing. They would win the case, and the winning would be the confession. And then I called Ruth. Ruth Vandermeer is my late wife's older sister. 66 years old, 4'11", and she worked 31 years as a court reporter in the Eighth Circuit. She has heard more sworn testimony than most judges. When Eleanor died, Ruth came for the funeral and stayed 9 weeks, and did not once tell me it was going to be all right. I drove out to her place in Willard on a Saturday in May, and I sat at her kitchen table, and I laid it all out. The deed, the LLC, Pruitt, the 14 files, the plan. She listened without saying a word for 40 minutes. Then she got up and poured out my coffee and poured me a fresh one. And she said, "Walter, if you're going to let them put handcuffs on you, I'm going to be the one holding the copies. Everything you have, I want a duplicate in my safe deposit box, updated weekly. And if you go dark for more than 12 hours, I go to the Attorney General myself." I have known that woman since 1979, and I have never in my life been happier to be told what to do. There was one more thing, and I did not plan it, and it is the part I can't tell without stopping for a second. My granddaughter Nora is 16. She has Eleanor's chin and a used Corolla with a bad clutch and a summer job scooping ice cream at the dairy barn out on 9. In the second week of June, she came to my house on a Wednesday afternoon, which she never does, and she sat down on the arm of Eleanor's chair, and she would not look at me. She said, "Grandpa, Dad asked me to write something." I asked her what kind of something. She said, "A statement about how you've been." He said it was just for the doctor. He said it would be like 3 sentences. He said I should write about Christmas, when you couldn't find the gravy boat and you got upset. And then he said if I did it, he'd cover the rest of the car. I asked her what she told him. She said, "I told him the gravy boat was in the garage because Mom put it there." She said, "I told him I'm not writing anything about you, ever." And then she started crying and she said, "Grandpa, is something wrong with you? Are they right?" And I sat there, my friend, and I made the hardest call of the whole 91 days. I looked my 16-year-old granddaughter in the eye and I said, "Nora, there is nothing wrong with my mind, and in about 3 weeks, something is going to happen that will look very bad, and I need you to remember this exact conversation and not believe a single thing you see." And she nodded and wiped her face and said, "Okay." She never asked me for a single detail. She just believed me. That is the reason any of the rest of it was worth doing. On the last night of June, my recorder caught the conversation that Detective Okonquo listened to at 5:20 in the morning in that interview room with his hand over his mouth. Marcus and Claire were at my kitchen table. I was upstairs with the door shut and the lights off, and my phone in my pocket, listening live. Marcus said the hearing was set for the 9th and that they should not wait for it. He said the stronger move was an emergency ex parte order, filed Monday, based on an incident. He said they needed an incident. Claire asked what kind. He said, "We call it in. Late. Say he's agitated. Say he doesn't recognize the house. Say he's got a weapon in there for all they know. They'll bring him in, and once there's an arrest on the record, no judge in Kessler County looks twice at the petition." And my daughter, whom I taught to ride a bicycle on Bellamy Court, whose fever I sat up with for 3 nights in 1991, said, "Will they hurt him?" Marcus said, "They'll be gentle. He's an old man." And she said, "Okay, do it Sunday. I want to be there. It has to look like I called them, or the neighbors will talk." Then Marcus said the thing I will hear until the day I die. He said, "Claire, he's 71 and he walks to the reservoir every morning like he's got 20 years left." We don't have 20 years. Pruitt's got 11 more of these lined up, and the window on your dad's estate closes the 2nd. Some doctor writes down a real diagnosis, and a real one gets a real fiduciary appointed. We take it now, or we watch $6.4 million go to whatever charity your mother put in that letter." And Claire said, I know. Just after Thursday, can we stop talking about him like an account?" He said, "After Thursday, honey, he isn't going to be an account. He's going to be a resident. That is the recording. That is what a detective in Harlow Springs, Missouri listened to twice at 5:20 in the morning. And when it ended, he stood up and walked out of the room, and I heard him tell somebody in the hallway to get the state task force on the phone. Right now. I don't care what time it is. We had them. We had the deed, the LLC, the 14 Pruitt files, and now we had 2 people planning a false police report on my own kitchen recording. Okonquo brought me coffee in a real mug. He said, "Mr. Hale, we're going to have this whole thing unwound by lunch." And that is when it fell apart. At 6:50, a sergeant knocked and handed Okonquo a fax, and Okonquo read it and did not say anything for a long moment. Judge Renner in Kessler County had granted the emergency ex parte order at 6:15 that morning, not Thursday. That morning, Marcus had filed at 5, attaching the arrest, attaching Pruitt's evaluation, attaching an affidavit from a hospital administrator describing her father's decompensation over the preceding night. Temporary guardianship of the person and the estate of Walter J. Hale, granted to Marcus Deal pending final hearing. Effective immediately. And by then, it was on television. Claire had called Channel 6 before she called the police. The morning broadcast ran a segment out of a satellite truck parked at the end of my driveway, and there was my daughter in the sage blouse with her eyes swollen just right, saying that her father had built a career protecting vulnerable seniors, and now the hardest thing she had ever done was protect him from himself, and that she hoped their family's pain would help other families act sooner. Okonquo watched it on the sergeant's phone and put it face down on the table. He said, "Mr. Hale." He said it slow. He said, "I have to explain something to you. That order is a valid court order out of another county. As of 6:15 this morning, your son-in-law has legal authority over your accounts, your medical decisions, and your residence. I can hold a fraud investigation open, but I cannot undo a judge's order from this room. And by the time a hearing gets scheduled to challenge it, that man will have moved everything you own." He rubbed his face with both hands. He said, "We lost. I'm sorry." She played it perfectly. She used my department to build the record. She used the press to build the sympathy. And she used a judge in a county I don't work in to close it out. I reached across the table and picked up the mug and drank some of the coffee, which was terrible, and I set it down. I said, "Detective, do you know what happens to that order in about 90 minutes? He said, "No." I said, "It gets read by an attorney at the state registry who is going to open an attachment and find 11 documents bearing my signature that I never signed. My friend, I had built the door and hung the sign and left the light on, and my son-in-law had walked through it at 5 o'clock in the morning of his own free will, in a filing stamped by a court clerk with his name on the certificate of service." Okonquo looked at me for a long time. Then he laughed, one short note, and he said, "You set the whole thing up so they'd have to file it." I said, "A forged deed sitting in a drawer is a piece of paper. A forged deed submitted to a judge is a felony with a docket number." At 7:40, my phone rang. It was Marcus. I put it on the table and answered on speaker with 3 law enforcement officers in the room, and my son-in-law's voice came out warm as a heating pad. "Walt! Walt! Thank God! Are you okay? Listen to me. Nobody meant for it to go like this. I've been on the phone since 5 trying to find out where they took you. I'm getting in the car right now. I've got Gene Halbrook meeting me down there, best defense guy in the region, and we are going to get this trespass thing dismissed before noon, because it's insane. It's your house. Everybody knows it's your house. Claire's a wreck. She's beside herself. Just don't say anything to anybody until I get there. All right? Don't sign anything. Don't talk to any detectives. You know how they twist things with somebody your age. I'm your family. I'm going to fix this." Okonquo's jaw was so tight I could see the muscle jumping, and I said, in the small, thin, grateful voice of an old man who has been up all night, "Thank you, son. I don't understand any of this. There was a paper about the house. They said I don't live there. Marcus, please hurry. They're saying something about Springfield." He said, "Don't you worry about Springfield. 20 minutes. I hung up, and Okonquo said, quietly, "That was the ugliest thing I have ever heard a man do to his father-in-law." I said, "Detective, I gave him 20 minutes to drive here and confess to jurisdiction. Please have somebody at the door." At 8:05, my son-in-law came through the lobby of the Harlow Springs police station in a charcoal suit with an attorney on either side of him, and he slapped his palm on the counter and announced to the entire room that he was the court-appointed guardian of Walter Hale and that his ward was to be released into his custody immediately. He held up the order. He said the word ward 4 times. He told the desk sergeant that if his father-in-law had been questioned without his guardian present, the department was looking at a civil rights action. He was very good. I watched him from the hallway by the secure door for almost a full minute, and I thought, if I had actually been what he described, it would have worked. That's the thing about this crime, my friend. It doesn't need you to be sick. It only needs everyone in the room to have already decided that you might be. Then I walked out into the lobby. I had shaved with a razor Okonquo brought me from his gym bag. My shirt was tucked. I was carrying my own file box under one arm, and Ruth Vandermeer was standing next to me holding a second one. having driven in from Willard at 6:30 with the safe deposit copies, and behind her was a man from the state task force named Corbin, whom I had trained in 2016. Marcus turned around. I have thought a great deal about his face in that second. It was not fear. Not yet. It was arithmetic. I watched a man run the numbers and come up short and try 3 times to get a different answer. He said, "Walt." I said, "Marcus, before anyone says anything else, I want you to know that I recorded my kitchen for 91 days, that the order you filed this morning triggered an automatic transmission of every attachment to the state registry at 6:19, and that the trust you just took control of contains $11,000 and a tripwire." He said, "This is a misunderstanding." I said, "No, son. It's a docket number." They took him in the lobby, in front of his own attorneys, both of whom stepped back with the smooth, synchronized motion of men who have just realized they were retained under false pretenses. He went down to his knees on the tile and started saying my name over and over. "Walt, Walt, Walt." And then he started saying Dad, which he had not called me in 9 years of marriage to my daughter. And he said, "Dad, please, I did it for her. I did all of it for her." And I stood there and I did not feel one single thing that I expected to feel. Pruitt was arrested at his office in Springfield at 11 that same morning. The task force had his 14 files by then, and they had my cross-reference showing that 4 of those evaluations described in-person examinations on dates the doctor was documented as being out of the state. He gave up the 3 attorneys inside of 6 hours. He wept in the hallway, I'm told, and said he had never once believed anyone would check. Claire I saved for last, and I did not save her out of cruelty. I asked Corbin to let me be at the house. She was on the porch when the cars came up Bellamy Court, still in the sage blouse at 12:30, phone in hand, because Channel 6 had asked her for a follow-up. When the agent came up the ramp, Claire produced the order the way she had been coached, holding it out, saying that she was the daughter of the ward, and that the estate was under protective management by court appointment. And the agent read it and said, "Thank you, ma'am. This is very helpful, because we were going to have to spend 6 months proving you had knowledge of the instrument." My daughter stood on my porch with the paper in her hand and watched the whole architecture of it come apart behind her eyes. They let me talk to her before they put her in the car. 10 minutes, on the steps, with an agent 10 feet away. She did not beg. I'll give her that. She looked at me, and she said the thing she had been holding for 30 years. She said, "You were never here." She said, "You sat at other people's kitchen tables for 28 years, and you saved other people's parents, and you missed every single thing in this house." She said, "I had a fever in 1991, and you know how I know? Because you tell that story. That's the one you tell. One night out of my whole childhood, and you tell it like it's a record of something. Mom raised me. Mom died in that room and you didn't cry, you organized. And now you want to stand there like a righteous man because you outsmarted me. And here is what I said to her, my friend. And I have thought about whether it was the right thing to say every day since. I said, Claire, you're right. Not partly. You're right. I gave the best years of my attention to strangers, and I came home and I let your mother carry you alone. And I told myself that a paycheck and a roof was the same as being a father, and it was not. And I will carry that until they put me next to her. I owed you a childhood, and I did not pay it. Then I said, but I did not owe you my life, and I did not owe 11 other people's parents to your husband's business. And you had 100 nights to knock on my door and say, Dad, you failed me, and instead you had a doctor write down that I wander. She said, I know. And then she said, quietly, I hated how easy you made it. And then she was in the car. Nora came out from behind the hedge about a minute after they pulled away. 16 years old, still in her Dairy Barn shirt, having driven that Corolla with the bad clutch from the ice cream stand the second Ruth called her. She did not say anything. She just walked up the ramp her father built and put her arms around my neck, and we stood there on the porch of a house that was legally mine again as of 2 o'clock that afternoon. The federal indictment came down in October. Marcus Deal took a plea on wire fraud, forgery of a public instrument, and conspiracy, and he is serving 11 years in a facility in Illinois. Dr. Alan Pruitt surrendered his license, was convicted on 9 counts, and got 14 years. And I sat in the gallery on the day the judge read the names of all 14 families into the record, and I watched 2 sons and a daughter in the second row hear, for the first time, that their mothers had not been sick. 3 of those estates have been unwound. The other 11 are in litigation. 2 of those people did not live to see it. and I go to sleep with that most nights. Claire got 4 years. She testified against Pruitt fully, without a deal in place, which the prosecutor told me was unusual. She writes to me on the first Sunday of every month. I have not opened any of them. They are in a shoebox on the top shelf of Eleanor's closet, and one of these days I am going to sit down with a cup of coffee and read them in order, and I do not know yet what happens after that. I sold the house on Bellamy Court in the spring, not out of bitterness. It was just too much house for one man, and the ramp made me tired to look at. Ruth and I bought a place together outside Rogers, Arkansas, 40 minutes from the water, 2 bedrooms, and a screened porch. And before anybody's mind runs off, she has her room, and I have mine, and we argue about the thermostat like 2 people who have known each other for 47 years. Nora comes down for most of the summer. She starts at Missouri State in the fall. She is going to study social work, and she has not told me why, and I have not asked, because I think I know. The $6,400,000 is gone now. Every dollar of it. Eleanor left a letter in 2019 saying she wanted the bulk of it to do something useful, and I put $140,000 in trust for Nora's education, and the rest went into a foundation that does exactly one thing. It pays for independent counsel and independent medical evaluation for any senior in 3 states facing an emergency guardianship petition they did not ask for. It is run by a board of 5 people, none of whom are related to me, and I do not sit on it. That was deliberate. I want to leave you with something practical, my friend, because I have told you a story, but a story is not much use by itself. Keep one account at an institution nobody in your family knows about, with a statement that comes to a post office box. Never sign a blank page. Not one. Not for a nurse. Not for a bank. Not for your own child. Get a letter from your own doctor once a year that says you are competent, and date it, and keep it where you can find it in 5 minutes. And name somebody outside your bloodline who has to co-sign before anyone can act for you. It costs about $400 and one uncomfortable afternoon, and it is the cheapest insurance in America. They never wanted my money. If they had wanted my money, they could have asked, and God help me, I would have written the check. What they wanted was my signature, and the right to use it after they had convinced a room full of decent, busy people that the hand that made it had gone soft. And a man who spent 28 years reading other people's signatures for a living knows exactly what his own is worth. I sit on that screened porch most evenings now with the fan going and the light coming down orange through the pines. Ruth reads. Nora texts me pictures of things she thinks are funny. I am 72 years old and I have less family than I had a year ago, and more than I have had in 30. So tell me, my friend, has somebody in your life ever started deciding things for you, in a kind voice, before you were ready? What did you do about it? Put it down in the comments below, because somebody scrolling past tonight is sitting in a quiet house wondering if they're imagining it, and your words might be the thing that makes them go pull their own records in the morning. If this one meant something to you, leave a like and stick around, because there are more of these, and the truth always takes longer than it should, but it gets there.